Hello everyone, Mrs. Obitz is back. Here we go. So we've read so far Entrapped by the Ice, pages 216 through pages 234. So we're going to continue now with page 236. So here we go. May 5th, 1916. The Caird made her way through the storm-tossed seas while Shack and his men drank rancid, spoiled, rancid sea oil to prevent seasickness. The ocean swelled and hissed and broke over the small boat as men worried about the terrible graybeards found in these waters. Graybeards were monstrous waves that came quietly and quickly, threatening everything in their path. The men had to battle to keep the boat free of ice, because any added weight might sink the Caird. Suddenly, Shack screamed from the tiller. The men turned around to face the biggest wave they have ever seen. It was a graybeard. The boat shuddered on impact as the mountain of water spun it around like a top. Water filled the Caird while the men bailed furiously. Jagged rocks in her hull, which Chippy had used to keep the boat from capsizing, saved the day. Capsizing means it's like turning over. You don't want that in the middle of the ocean, I can tell you that. Page 238. May 10th, 1916. Finally, after 17 grueling days at sea, young McCarthy shouted, "Land ho!" South Georgia Island lay dimly ahead. The whaling station was on the other side of the island, but the men had to land now or die. Their fresh water was gone, and they were too weak to battle the sea to the other side of the island. This just keeps getting more bleak and more bleak, doesn't it, guys? While the men planned their landing attempt, they were hit by the worst hurricane they have ever encountered. For 9 terrible hours, they fought to keep afloat. Miraculously, just as things looked hopeless, the sea calmed enough to allow the Caird to land safely on the rocky beach of King Haakon Bay. The men landed near a small cave with a freshwater spring nearby. Oh, that's pretty fortunate. The cave would have become a temporary home for John Vincent and Chippy McNeish. Both had suffered too much on the voyage and could not survive the long hike across the island to the whaling station. Tim McCarthy stayed behind to take care of the 2 sick men. Fortunately, water for drinking, wood from old shipwrecks for fire, and albatross eggs and seals to eat meant those who stayed behind would be all right while waiting for rescue. But Shack, Big Tom, and Skipper Worsley would have to climb over a series of jagged edges that cut the island in half like a saw blade. All they could carry was a little Primus stove, fuel for 6 meals, 50 feet of rope, and an ice axe. Their only food consisted of biscuits and light rations that hung in socks around their necks. That means their extra food was hung in socks around their necks. On the 8th day ashore, May 18th, it was time to set off on the most dangerous climb they have ever attempted. May 19th, 1916. Remember, this journey has lasted a long time. So May 19th now. 3 times the men struggled up mountains, only to find that the terrain was impassable on the other side. The men stopped only to eat a soup called hoosh, to nibble on stale biscuits, or to nap 5 minutes, with each man taking a turn awake so that there would be someone to wake the others. On and on the exhausted men hiked. From one mountain summit they saw that night was coming fast. Being caught on a peak at night meant certain death. Super windy up there and cold. They had to make a dangerous gamble, so Shack assembled a makeshift toboggan from the coiled up rope, and the men slid 1,500 feet down the mountain in one big slide. A toboggan is like a sled. Woo! They slid down the mountain. Despite the perilous landing, they couldn't help but laugh with relief after they had crashed unhurt into a large snowbank. The men had survived the long slide, but danger still lay ahead. They had been hiking for more than 30 hours now without sleep. Finally, all three heard the sound of a far-off whistle. Was it the whaling station? They climbed a ridge and looked down. Yes, there it was! 2 whale catchers were docked at the pier. From this distance, the men at the station were the size of insects. Shaq fought against being too reckless. The three still had to lower themselves down a 30-foot waterfall by hanging onto their rope and swinging through the icy torrents. At last, the ragged explorers stumbled towards the station. They had done it! Page 244. 4 p.m., May 20th, 1916. Thorolf Sorrel, the manager of the whaling station, heard a knock outside his office and opened the door. He looked hard at the ragged clothes and blackened faces of the men who stood before him. "Do I know you?" he asked. "I'm Shackleton," came the reply. Tears welled up in Sorrel's eyes as he recognized his old friend's voice. The 3 explorers received a hero's welcome from the whaling crew. The whalers knew that no one had ever done what Shack had accomplished. The next day, Skipper Worsley took a boat and picked up McCarthy, Vincent, and McNeish, while Shack began preparations for the Elephant Island rescue. It would take more than 3 months and 4 attempts to break through the winter pack ice and save the stranded men, but Shack finally did it, and without any loss of life. The men were glad to have a ship's deck once again under their feet. Finally, they were going home. Oh my goodness. What a journey. And it's so miraculous that none of the men in the crew died. They came across such perilous conditions. And it's just a miracle that no one died and they were able to stick together and save each other. So that's one thing that Trapped by the Ice, although it's action-packed and it just seems like one bad thing after another, it turns out so well. That's why I love this story, because it just gives you hope that if things are looking pretty bleak, any miracle could still happen. Thanks for listening.